One day in November 1903,
In June of
Marie Curie
2005,
and her
Pharaoh
husband got a
Fever
letter
struck
in the mail.
California.
The letter
James
was found
Goodall,
to travel
half
from
a
London
million
to
down to
Sweden.
Sweden.
Her father
New York
came to
Los
Angeles
Angeles
paid
County.
the fare. This is Who Was with Miss Wren. Who was Susan B. Anthony? November 5th, 1872 was a presidential election day. Ulysses S. Grant was running against Horace Greeley. In Rochester, New York, men sat by the ballot box to receive votes. The men of Rochester entered the polling place, filled out a ballot, and dropped it in the box. It was business as usual. However, in the doorway stood a middle-aged woman in a black dress. Everyone recognized her. It was Susan B. Anthony, the greatest fighter for women's rights in the United States. She had come with her 3 sisters. They wanted to vote. Women did not have the right to vote in New York in 1872. Sometimes women filled out the ballots simply as a protest. These ballots were never counted. This year, Susan decided to cast a vote herself. She had never done it before, only because she spent so much time traveling the country giving speeches for voting rights that she was never at home long enough to prove she lived there. Until that year. Susan demanded a ballot. As a citizen of the United States, she said she had the right to vote. She had brought with her a copy of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which guaranteed the right of citizens to vote. She had also brought a copy of the New York State Constitution. The men felt that Susan was wrong. They believed that the 14th Amendment gave only male citizens the right to vote. Susan looked them in the eyes. In her career, she had faced down angry mobs. She'd been pelted with rotten eggs and tomatoes. Figures made to look like her had been dragged through the streets and burned, all because she wanted equal rights. These men were no match for Susan B. Anthony. They let her and her sisters vote. Susan was thrilled. But 3 weeks later, as she sat in her parlor, there was a knock at the door. It was a deputy U.S. Marshal. He had come to arrest her. Susan held out her wrists to be handcuffed. If the U.S. government wanted a fight, she was ready. Chapter 1. A Quaker Girl. Susan B. Anthony was the second oldest of 7 children, 5 girls and 2 boys. She was born on February 15, 1820. Her father, Daniel, was a Quaker. Her mother, Lucy, had been a Baptist until her marriage. The Quakers didn't believe in dancing, singing, fancy clothes, or drinking, but they did believe that girls needed an education just like boys did. So Susan and her sisters Guelma, Hannah, and Mary would be educated along with her brothers, Daniel and Jacob, called Merit. Her sister Eliza died when she was 2 years old. Susan lived in Adams, Massachusetts until she was 6. Then the family moved to Battenville, where Susan's father opened a mill. One day, Susan came home from school upset. The boys in her class were learning long division. When Susan asked her teacher if she could learn it too, he said that girls didn't need to learn long division. So Daniel Anthony set up his own school at home where his daughters could get an equal education. Susan liked school. She also liked working at her father's mill whenever one of his employees got sick. She especially liked earning her own money, $3 for 2 weeks of work. She used her salary to buy her mother 6 coffee cups and saucers. But sometimes what happened at the mill puzzled Susan. One day, she mentioned to her father that Sally Ann Hyatt, who was one of the workers, seemed to know more about weaving than her boss, Elijah. Why did Daniel not make her the boss? It would never do to have a woman overseer at the mill, her father replied. Susan accepted her father's word, but it didn't make sense to her. Why couldn't a woman be just as good a boss as a man? In the evenings, after work and school were over, the family spent many happy hours together in the parlor. Daniel encouraged all his children to take an interest in the important issues of the day. One of these issues was abolition, the fight against slavery. When Susan was 15, she started to teach the younger children at her father's school. 2 years later, she traveled to the nearby town of Easton to live with a family and teach their children reading and writing. When the lessons were done, Susan helped with the household chores. Daniel knew how much his daughter loved learning. He enrolled her in Deborah Moulson's Female Seminary in Hamilton, Pennsylvania. Susan was not very happy at the seminary. She missed her family. Her time there was cut short by the Panic of 1837, an economic depression that wiped out many businesses in the United States, including Daniel's Mill. Now the family had no money. All their possessions were put up for sale, including the cups and saucers Susan had given her mother. Even their eyeglasses and underwear were sold. Susan's father had always taught his children to be independent. Now it was time for Susan to show him what she had learned. She was going to earn her own living. Susan's family were Quakers. The Quakers, also called Friends, are a religious movement. They believe that every person should follow the inner light of God inside themselves. The first Quakers in America came from England in the 17th century. Many came to America to find religious freedom, though at first the only colonies that accepted Quakers were Rhode Island and Pennsylvania. They were ordinary farmers who tried to live in a way that brought them closer to God. They wore simple clothes and didn't take part in pastimes like dancing, singing, or drinking. In the United States, they played a major role in the fight against slavery. The Quakers were one of the first groups to publicly condemn it. After listening to this introduction and first chapter on Susan B. Anthony, consider these questions. What challenges did Susan face in her early life? How was her early life similar to your own, and how is it different? Answer these questions in a Seesaw post. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.